Good morning and welcome to today's webinar on wind energy development in Latvia, brought to you by the Latvian Wind Energy Association and the law firm Sorainen. My name is Renārs, and I am the Executive Director at the Latvian Wind Energy Association. And before we kick off with the interesting part, I will bring you through a couple of housekeeping rules as well as the program, which is relatively short in terms of the speakers. So today you will hear from introduction words and welcome speech from Toms Nāburgs, who is the head of the Latvian Wind Energy Association, followed by Renārs Urbanovičs, who is the member of the supervisory board at the Latvian Wind Energy Association. He will bring you through all the steps in the wind energy development in Latvia. And then you will also hear on the legal aspect from Viktorija Cherkas, who is the counsel at the law firm Sorainen. After that, we will have a relatively short Q&A session. Thank you to those who have already sent in your questions. We will address those and let's see how much we can take on and respond to your questions that have come in during the webinar. And the means of doing that is the chat section. Please write the questions in the chat section. And I would also like to remind you that the webinar is recorded and it will be available on the associations and Sorainen websites and social media accounts, but also we will send the recording and the presentation to those who registered for the webinar. So yeah, that would be it from my side. And with this, I would like to give floor to Toms for the welcome speech. Toms, the floor is yours, or rather the microphone is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to open this webinar, first of a kind, and it's just the beginning of the series of the webinars. I want to thank Sorainen for being proactive member of our association, supporting us with the legal advice and being host of this event, co-hosting it with us. So as everybody knows, Latvia has a vast untapped wind potential. However, the regulatory framework has been developed under really fragmented type of framework. So we don't have a single regulatory act. So to navigate the landscape and to understand how to do things and where to start is really complicated if you're a newcomer to Latvian market. So it really takes to be an expert and have a lot of experience to know where to look for which piece of the information and which kind of regulation to put it all together, and it doesn't come easy. So it really is all about experience and local know-how. So today you'll have this good opportunity to hear from local experts, from Renārs and Viktorija, who are technical and legal experts in this field. And I hope that this webinar will be both informative and useful in your journey into Latvian wind business. So enjoy.
Thank you. And with this, I would like to give the word now to Renārs Urbanovičs, who also represents not only the association, but also is an active developer in Latvia and represents Utilitas Wind. And yes, with that, let's hear from Renārs.
Welcome to today's webinar on wind farm development in Latvia. My name is Renārs Urbanovičs. I'm a council member of Latvian Wind Power Association. And we are going to cover during today's webinar very general and relatively broad topics which are essential for a successful development process. And as a result, I guess, and I'm hopeful you'll be able to learn some items which you might find useful also in your daily work when you are investigating or potentially also working on wind farm development here in Latvia. So let's start with some of first items in relation to planning and pre-development. Now, each process sets out with a plan, and it's crucial to have a clear perspective on your timing. One of the key issues when looking into development is to have a clear understanding of how much time essentially it will take to get to a certain stage of development. And of course, Latvia is not an exception on relatively European terms. We are facing quite similar planning procedures, and we expect quite similar timelines. So, well, if you are realistic about your expectations, which means essentially that you would have roughly somewhere between 2 to 3 years to, well, I'd say rather 3 years to get to a point where you have a project permitted, and then, well, adding a couple of years for construction and commissioning phase, then you are good to proceed. Now, in order to accomplish that, you will need a team. So, and you will need also financial resources. So think in advance of who will be actually, well, supporting you in all of this, professionals in, well, real estate, lawyers, technical engineers, and so forth. And these resources are quite scarce nowadays in Latvia as well, due to quite high interest in development. And, well, financial resources, of course, that's also an important item to consider. I'd say roughly you should expect that, well, the total costs to get to the point from well, scratch down to a permitted project, most probably you would be looking at the total, well, capex, development capex between, well, let's say 50,000 euros to 100,000 euros in total. But again, this is a very wide range, and in this case, most probably it all depends how many mistakes you make along the way. So, well, plans therefore is even more important. And finally, your strategy and the way how you're approaching this development, whether you are industry player whose intent is to operate assets long-term, or you are just a developer looking to get the project permitted and find an exit in a, well, in someone interested in taking over this project and carrying out its implementation, well, that's a different story. So when the plan is set, it's now the first actual step of understanding how you would select the area for development. And there are, well, several important issues to consider in Latvian context. Now, first of all, it's about municipalities. It's quite crucial to understand and to try to, well, to involve as little municipalities as possible, because it simply adds an additional area of activities, because some of the processes you have to run separately in different municipalities. It's not impossible, it just is complicating a lot of things along the way. And at the same time, each municipality has its own zoning plan. Well, it has been a tradition to change administrative split of municipalities across Latvia, well, roughly every 15 years. And once it's done, they come up with new planning, a zoning plan. And as a result, in this case, well, now it's 2023. In most municipalities, you are facing zoning plans which were approved back in 2014, 2013. And at that time, understanding and well, basic integration of wind power into zoning plans was, well, quite limited. So in most cases, you would have to deal with going over these limitations. Once again, it's not impossible. It just complicates things and adds some time requirements along the way. Now, onto land ownership. It's also quite important. Since you are dealing with large development of most probably of large wind farms, you can either select areas where there is like one central or several central landowners and focus on using lands and in a certain area, or you can go across more fragmented ownership. And in the first case, you would definitely save time, and most probably you will not save costs. And in the second case, just the opposite. So it's another trade-off to look at. Of course, it's always possible to mix both of them, but eventually you would once again will face this difference in timing and cost variables. Now, it's also important when looking at your potential area for development to look after potential environmental challenges. So all of the environmentally important nature preserves, Natura 2000 areas and so forth, micro reserves, they are publicly listed and available from the relevant government authorities. It's just a matter of knowing in advance whether you are too close to any of them, which might present eventual challenge later on. Now, grid proximity, it's quite obvious. Well, depending, of course, on your size, the size of the wind farm you are developing, you might be willing to be more relaxed in terms of grid proximity issues, because law of large numbers applies anyhow, and eventually, in some cases, when you are connecting a large wind farm to 33 kilovolt high voltage line, you would be quite okay to cover the area, cover a distance of at least 15-20 kilometers to get grid access there as well. And finally, overall wind conditions. Well, generally, the difference itself across all of Latvia, when we're looking at hub heights of roughly 120, 150, 160 meters is not so high. Well, let's say it is there. In some cases, it's quite considerable. Of course, coastal areas are much more suitable for development, but then again, it's a combination of all these factors above that will eventually determine also how financially successful your project is. So think about all of these issues at the same time and make the right conclusions. And now on to who are the most important stakeholders in development process and what to expect from them. So let's go through a short list. Once again, as I mentioned before, municipalities are, let's say, the key cornerstones there. It's several different paths, starting from environmental impact assessment down to zoning planning and later on to construction permitting, where municipalities are playing their role. And as you might expect elsewhere as well, some of them are traditionally quite forthcoming towards wind development, some of them are not. And it's important, essentially to start on a positive note with any municipality you would like to have your project developed in. So let's please go after a cordial talk to a municipality quite early in your development process. And as a second item, also consider some specialty government authorities, which, let's say, are not important for overall project development in all areas, but then again, there might be some issues. Now, Ministry of Defense with relation to defense radars in some areas, civil aviation in relation to civil aviation, some other authorities, which have quite specific agenda among their tasks, which could potentially influence your project. That's something to better understand as soon as possible, if there are any requirements towards from their perspective. Now, community and environmental NGOs, this is quite understood. Some of the municipalities have their own community organizations who are taking care of either supporting or destroying your projects along the way, as well as nationwide NGOs. But then again, as long as you are reasonable in your expectations and also your approach, you should be fine. Well, private landowners, and this extends a little beyond just the ones you have contacted in terms of placing turbines or any infrastructure on the lands, but also your, let's say, closest neighbors in this as well. Well, it's important to involve them as well. And although there has been an attempt to, get over this issue of not in my backyard principle or phenomenon in Latvia through means of adding some community support on governmental regulation level, this has not yet materialized in some regulations. So this might be quite challenging in some of the cases. But then again, municipality is a key to indirectly approach landowners as well. And finally, at least when you are carrying out balance of plant construction, especially roads or foundations, you definitely must learn what are the local businesses where you would be able to source some materials for this process. So get a better knowledge of who could support you on this as well, because it would then mean quite a lot in terms of potential reduction in your costs as well. So all of these are relatively important, and please pay attention to who your closest stakeholders in this process are. As you have learned this, now I guess it's the time then to move on and to draft your first layout. So as we discussed before, you know the approximate area. Now it's about placing turbines, just to understand exact location of turbines, exact location of some elements which are critical for development, and therefore, you have to follow government regulations in a number of factors, and mostly this involves minimum distances to residential housing, to nature protection areas, and other items. The same applies to existing energy infrastructure, and public road access is also important, because eventually you would like to use that as much as possible, and it also helps local community appreciate your efforts in development as well, since most probably they will end up with much better public roads than they had before due to your involvement as well. And finally, now onto overall wind resource assessment. I guess it's the right time to start planning also installing your MetMast or LiDAR in order to secure data for a detailed wind situation on the site, which eventually will form the basis for annual energy production estimates and other items which are critical for bankability. So please pay close attention to these items and then come up with a first layout, because eventually you would have to present it to all authorities. And even if you change it later on, there is something to work with already at this stage. Based on the layout, you are now ready to proceed to securing the land resources you would need for the project. Once again, based on the layout, you will quite easily be able to distinguish between what you need for placing turbines, where we would need some access roads and cable extensions made, and of course where a substation would be located. And then again, there are different types of documents which would be, or let's say, legal relationships you would establish for this, but this is something that will be discussed later on. Now, it's quite important to see that, there is definitely a distinction whether you're dealing with private or public landowners. Well, the second case is much more difficult, as especially time-wise. Although, government or municipal institutions, they live and follow by the rules. These rules are quite often quite bureaucratic, and it's not so clear whether you would be able to get to the to the end node at the time you have intended. So when possible, just a personal suggestion is to try to if you want to have a peace of your mind regarding your scheduling, try to focus on private areas. And after during all of this process, it's important to identify which land is really important for development. And so essentially you have to work on turbine placement and substation placement. As roads and cables, it's something that most probably will have 2 or 3 options to choose from later on, even if you are facing some difficulties with landowners there. After the layout is finalized, then you have a clear understanding whether you'll be able to build on the land based on landowner's perspective. Now it's time to move on to environmental impact assessment, because this is a single, most time-consuming procedure you would encounter throughout the whole development procedure. And it's important to start it as soon as possible. Now, we will not go into much more details regarding initial environmental impact assessment, as most probably you are thinking about developing something considerable, and this would not apply in your case. So most probably you'd be facing full environmental impact assessment procedure, and there are certain requirements to follow this process if you are looking at something about 50 megawatt capacity. But overall, this process is something that would take roughly around 2 years if you are expedient and able to secure all the resources along the way. And resources in this case are mostly experts who would have to carry out environmental studies, ornithologists, bat experts, botanical experts, and who would provide a insight into the area you are studying, and eventually that would shape your final ultimate layout as a process of environmental impact assessment is finished. But then again, roughly you would expect at least 2 years for this process to be fully completed. While carrying out environmental impact assessment, one additional process you are well equipped to start and to complete is adjustment and alignment of your development plans with municipal zoning plan. There could be different levels of this, how this could potentially be done. It depends on the case, on the situation with the existing municipal zoning plan, and it's quite heavily case dependent. Similarly to environmental impact assessment, several public consultations will be required, so prepare for a long haul as well. It might, from a practical point of view, most probably it shouldn't take as long as environmental impact assessment. It could be shorter, but then again, it's case-on-case basis. But as I mentioned, it's really positive that you are able and you really do this in parallel what you are doing on the environmental front. So please try to keep the same pace here with respect to municipal zoning. Now, once you have gone through environmental impact assessment and also zoning issues are also resolved, now it's time to apply for a construction permit. The term of construction permit is a bit misleading in Latvian regulations. It's not really something that would allow you to proceed with actual construction. In fact, it's a 3-level permit. First of all, when you do initial application, essentially it's a concept design that will be approved. Then you are free to move on to full engineering design. Compared to other countries, Latvia is quite strict on this, that engineering itself should be done well in advance of actual construction works. So eventually you would have to end up with a complete engineering plan before you actually permitted to start construction. And now once you have done that and you have contracted company who be your BOP contractor for the project, you are now ready to proceed for construction. State authorities or municipalities of charge of this are municipality construction boards or a central construction control state bureau, which acts as a representative of government for larger projects of national interest. Any deadlines to take care of in terms of, if any party can appeal the construction permit that has been issued. So this should also be considered along the way. Something you also do in parallel, you would also start moving to securing the grid. Now, permits to install new capacity, it's anticipated this is something that will be delegated to this bureau, which I just mentioned, and technical conditions for grid access are issued by our transmission system operator, Augstprieguma tīkls. A certain reservation fee would have to be paid at the time when technical conditions are received and you are ready to proceed. But then again, there are certain terms and certain deadlines which you would have to meet during this process. This is especially pronounced in terms of grid connection conditions from the transmission system operator. So back to design and engineering. All the design of any construction to be carried out is to be developed by a company or a specialist registered in Latvian Construction Merchant Register. It's a formality, but well, anyway, you will not be able to, well, if you are operating from abroad, you will not be able to use your favorite engineers directly and to task them with preparing the designs, well, even if you trust them so much. The formality is requesting that the formal developer, well, let's say development engineer for the project is someone who is locally certified. So some solution should be found there. Once you have received your, well, approved, your concept design has been approved and you have received your construction permit, you are presented a list of parties, both well, governmental organizations or infrastructure operators who you'd have to get some inputs from in order to finalize your final designs, and they will be also involved in approving, well, providing some indirect approvals of your designs eventually. Of course, their interest is limited to, well, to some specific areas, so and they are not overlapping in most cases, so it's quite easy to handle. And then again, if your project is extending over several municipalities, all of them would be involved. Based on well, actual real-life situation, you most probably would expect a year in the process of to be spent on engineering. So when you're combining, well, environmental impact assessment as a first major step, and then design itself, well, eventually would end up with 2 + 1 years or 3 years in total. The grid connection itself would eventually consist of 2 sections, 2 parts. One of them is fully under your control, which is, let's say, your section involving most probably medium voltage, high voltage, transformer, switch gears, and relays. And then the second section is something that eventually will be built and operated by the transmission system operator. Transmission system operator defines well, its own requirements for its own section, and there are 2 options how to proceed. It's either turnkey solution, when a transmission system operator takes care of everything on their own end, including design and also constructions, or option 2, it's you're presented with a possibility to well, to prepare a design based on their requirements on your own, and then also pick a potential contractor who would eventually build out not only their substation, but also your section of the substation, which might be useful in some of the cases. And eventually it's something that will be, well, the section which is TSO zoned will be anyway transferred over to the TSO. There are provisions also towards qualification of who is able to carry out design and also construction works for the TSO, but this is pretty much spelled out by TSO's regulations. Eventually, you would most probably are facing something around 14 months period until full design is completed, and this is due to, well, currently lack of engineering resources on the Latvian market. Once again, locally certified specialists are allowed to formally to prepare these designs, but then again, perhaps you can work out some other solutions in a way that there is a split work with local specialists while going through and confirming what has been done by someone else here. Now, this process itself, well, after you have done your design and engineering work, then moves to construction phase, and well, eventually you would most probably expect something around 14 months for the substation and also grid connection point to be completed. At this point, Well, you are past the main obstacles. You have your project permitted, grid connection secure, and now it's a bankability check. So if you have done all your homework in advance, you should be in a good position to prepare all the final write-ups, go on a roadshow, and look out for investor if you are not investor yourself. And then, well, to decide on the way how this whole project is transacted, to decide on the financing model. And of course, at this point, you should have a clear understanding what will be your future revenue base. As well, is it merchant based or it's PPA based? Because there are no other alternatives currently on Latvian market. So it's quite a challenge to well, to work out your future revenue potential here. But then again, it's something that eventually we'll need in order to finalize the project and move to final investment decision. When talking about construction, so balance of plants, first of all, there are several items which are, let's say, quite peculiar for Latvian conditions. Now, of course, there is always this trade-off between selecting a turnkey BOP contractor or picking several contractors responsible for their own area of activity and guiding them all along the way. So in a way, in this case would require a lot of construction management to carry this out, but risks and gains are also quite similar. So in the first case, if it's turnkey BOP contractor, well, most probably will end up, you will get your desired solution relatively easy, but then again at much higher cost. And while there are several contractors that would require a lot of management along the way, but then again there are certain financial gains in this. Well, another point to consider are coming from weather related issues, and well, there are several restrictions, well, nature imposed restrictions on construction process. So when designing a schedule for BOP works, please take into consideration that it's quite challenging. Well, it's not impossible, but it's quite challenging to carry out some of the works, especially in relation to road construction and piling during, well, relatively wet months of November, December, and March. And then again, there are traffic limitations imposed on a lot of municipal roads in spring season, March, April. So all of this should be accounted for in your plan and contract. In order to, well, complete the wind farm, of course, you need turbines. And in this case, there are certain items you would find in a classic turbine delivery and installation contract. So compliance, also grid compliance warranties, which you would expect from the manufacturer to provide. Another aspect to consider is whether you and how you would transfer, well, all the works that are completed, whether do you do this by transferring this on separate turbine basis or entire wind farm. This also impacts potential risks along the way and other items. Well, at the same time, there are also potential issues with actual construction process. So there might be delays due to weather conditions. It's not only about installation of turbines, but also even construction works when excess water levels could potentially harm your expected pace of progress in road constructions or bridge construction if it's necessary and so forth. There is always a chance to dig up something that you do not really wish to be ever found, and this is another externality which is not something you might predict in advance, but it might come up eventually. Latvia has been a war zone for 2 world wars, and there are a lot of well, explosives and that can be found if you are digging deep enough. And well, then you please face also a potential for making some adjustments to your design and engineering work during the construction phase, because, well, in practical terms, it will be always quite impossible to execute the project exactly 100% to the plans which were made initially and which was the basis for the construction permit. There might be some issues which we'll discover all along the way, so please prepare some, well, time to also make adjustments, which, well, is complicating this process, but it's not also making this impossible. Congratulations, you are now at the point when turbines are installed. BOP section of the wind farm is also complete. Grid connection is well, ready to be completed as well. So once you do that, you're able to energize your turbines, do internal checks, and well, take over the wind farm itself. But on top of that, you have to face also overall grid compliance, which is in line with EC Regulation 2016-631. Latvia is not an exception. Well, the standard norms which are contained there apply to our well, grid and to what our TSO expects from producers here as well. So definitely you would also have to produce a simulation model for the whole wind farm and the whole grid connection point as a part of this process as well. Once well, you energize your substation, you would have a 2-year period when to complete the grid compliance tests for the whole wind farm, but you are allowed to commercially operate turbines which have been installed meanwhile and are sort of still in this interim phase of commissioning. So you should complete these tests within 2 years, but still you're able to earn some interim revenues on the market. Once all grid compliance tests are completed and the final results are checked and confirmed by the TSO, they would issue your final operating permit for the wind farm. This would effectively mean that at this point you are now, well, in the heaven of developers. Your project is up and running. It's officially registered as a part of the grid. Congratulations. Just not to forget to make some additional registrations in some registers and also notify the ministry, but then again, most probably you will not definitely do this on the same day when you are holding a celebration party a bit later, but definitely this is a well, happy business to take care of. Another part of this business later on is operation of the wind farm. So eventually, well, of course, you always have this option to select a long-term operation and maintenance agreement with the turbine manufacturer or select any third parties. No recommendations with respect to that, I guess, and everyone is able to find their own way in this. It's fully up to you how to carry out. There are no, let's say, national level restrictions on that. And of course, when doing so, you would most probably prefer to have some availability warranty from the manufacturer, well, let's say operator of the wind farm at this point, in order to well, support your bankability case already at the time when you were planning to actually to start construction. So although this is let's say important, most probably this is something you have already well resolved in advance. And a separate note on PPAs which are applicable. So power purchase agreements. In Baltic context, it's quite challenging due to the obvious fact that the market itself is quite limited. Latvia is no exception compared to Scandinavian countries and to the rest of Europe. We are really a limited market in terms of independent energy, large energy consumers, and it's quite difficult to well, to advance your projects based on locally made PPAs. But At the same time, they are quite essential for bankability. So start working on this well in advance to make sure that by the time when your project is ready for its execution, you know your options. Thank you for joining in and being part of this webinar. We were really delighted to present this overview of wind farm development roadmap to you. I'm sure this will be followed by other webinars along the way, where we'll be much more specific regarding different areas of development, and we'll definitely go into more details there. Once again, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Renārs. Indeed, we will go into more details in the other series of webinars. So this is it's true. This is the first one. It's a general overview. It might have seemed a little too general, but stay tuned for the following events in the future. But now, yeah, once again, thank you. Let's thank Renārs for the extensive presentation. But wind energy development in Latvia, and in this case particularly, we're talking about onshore, is not only about practical and technical steps. There is also a lot to be considered when it comes to legal aspects. So, and hence with this I give floor to Viktorija from Sorainen, who will tell you more or nitty-gritty about the legal aspects of wind energy development in Latvia. So Viktorija, please, the floor is yours.
My name is Viktorija Cherkas, and I'm counsel of Sorainen with interest in energy law. Bienvenidos to the first and very general webinar on roadmap for wind farm development in Latvia. The purpose of my speech today is to provide you with a bit different angle of the same activities Renārs just described, and to guide you through main legal aspects to consider during wind park development. This information definitely will not be new for experienced developers, but is important for ones who are just laying the foundations of their knowledge in understanding the Latvian regulation for the wind park development, and forms a general basis for further knowledge. We offer to view wind park life cycle as 4 major parts: planning, development, construction, and operation. The first, pre-development or planning stage, an important part that lawyers like to keep as a must for successful development. What is important here from a legal perspective, and in addition to what Renārs has mentioned on practicalities. First, on the plan. Legal-wise, it's important to know the possible parameters of the project, especially minimum and maximum amount of VTGs planned in the wind park, whether a hybrid park is an option, the total capacities, offtakes, and all the other circumstances that you would like to see in the project. Next, list the sequence of actions, as some tasks can be performed in parallel, as you will see in the next slides. Other require document from a previous step, so a definite sequence of actions is a must. A separate project company, so-called SPV, a tool to be used. You have to understand at what time a new project company will be established for the planned wind park. Please pay attention that some documents or agreements in the development process may not be transferable or do require additional timing for such transfers. Next, check whether a law provides any simplified or beneficial procedures for your particular project. For example, get the status of object of national interest. It will allow to apply simplified rules of the EIA and gives some other benefits. It affects timing and it affects sequence. So you have to know whether your project does comply with these requirements. Please identify which documents have limited terms. It may affect not only the total sequence or timing for other actions, but also the overall project. Next, do you plan investors in your project? and at what stage. You should be aware of requirements for bankability, feasibility, and you should be aware of what usually lawyers, financists, technical people look into when they're evaluating the project. Last but not least, risk mitigation. You should know what documents can be appealed and how it affects the overall actions and timing, and what can be the consequences of such appeal. You have to have a plan B in case if it happens. By this, I want to highlight that lawyers are beneficial from the beginning, at least for some separate activities. Second step is to find an appropriate area for your wind park. What is important here from a legal perspective? How many municipalities are involved? In addition to what Renārs told, please do not forget that different zoning plans actually means different requirements for construction. In one place, you may not have any obligation to perform a detailed planning, for example, but in other municipality, it is a must, which turns that your project is different time-wise. Please also do not forget that substation and cable are parts of the project, and for them, some additional rules may apply, or at least an obligation to coordinate with such other municipality if it affects at least 2 municipalities. To note the details for placing, where it is allowed to place VTGs, how big particular land plots are, who are their owners, how far is the closest house or the transmission line, please use public registers available in Latvia. They will help you a lot to reply to these questions. Consult. Consult at least with the environmental specialists. Already knowing the approximate area, you will receive a lot of detailed information. Maybe the risks of some particular species in the area are so high that there is no use to start. You should look for another area or move its part to one or other different place. Also, the transmission system operator, prior to submission of the application, encourages to discuss possible connection solutions. Also, other specialists involved at this stage is beneficial for the overall project development. Third point of the roadmap is to identify the stakeholders. You have to understand with whom you are dealing. I would highlight the importance to identify the ones that may be unwilling to support your project, or at least the ones who are neutral during wind farm development. Please pay attention to active non-governmental organizations or neighbors. See how realistic may be the risk of appeal or counteractions from these parties. Do not ignore their interests. As a result of these 3 steps, you will have a first layout and a draft timeline and action plan. Having this, you can proceed to the next step, the development. The first step of actual development is to secure the land. Securing the land starts with understanding that for different parts of the wind farm, there are different legal scenarios. For transformer substation, developers shall purchase the land. For VTG and roads, acquire construction rights. And for cables, a servitude or just a written consent. In one of the next webinars, we will pay attention to different types of agreements for infrastructure, its pros and cons, but here you have to keep in mind that different scenarios are applied to different infrastructure. Second, I want to specifically highlight the importance of distinguishing public land and private one, as there are different rules and timing applicable for both of them. For public lands, you have to comply with specific procedures, which is more time-consuming and sometimes unpredictable than agreeing with the private ones. So I should agree with Renārs that it would be more easy if you address the private individuals with requests rather than public ones. Next, moving to heavy part of wind park development project, the environmental impact assessment. The law has 2 procedures, the initial EIA and a full one. The requirements to make one or other are seen on the screen, so I will not read them. But in any case, if a wind farm is exceeding 50 megawatt, it will be a full EIA. I previously mentioned a specific simplified EIA procedure that may be applied, that if 50 plus megawatt wind farm is admitted as a national interest object, it shall have a bit different procedure. We will dedicate special webinar for describing this possibility in more details. What is important to note here that environmental impact assessment is the first moment when developer shall have mandatory public consultations, meaning it will inform the society about the plans and it should receive the feedback and consider it. Therefore, to have this process smooth, it's important to correctly identify the stakeholders in one of the previous steps we've talking about. Moreover, the findings during the EIA will affect the project layouts. Therefore, be ready to make adjustments. In parallel to the environmental impact assessment, or after it, as you decide, you have to adjust the territory planning in order to comply with its requirements. What actually is required? Amend the territory plan, amend the local planning, or prefer the detailed plan. It will depend on the requirements of municipality and circumstances of the specific area. Also, please note that some municipalities now have opened their territory plans for amendments. Then any amendments there may be implemented faster as you jump into already existing process rather than initiating new one. This is another topic that might be considered at the moment when you are already choosing the area for development. This is the second process that requires public consultations. Therefore, when planning, you have to be clear with your strategy, whether you are time-wise combining both public consultations, the EIA and zoning one, or you strategically plan having them separated. First, approve the environmental impact assessment and only then start with the zoning topics. This should be discussed for a particular project and you have to have a specific plan for that. Next important step is receiving the construction permit. As mentioned by Renārs, Latvian law specifics is such that construction permit actually is like receiving a planning task. It gives no rights to construct, but is a basis for design development and identifies the parties to coordinate the design with. What is crucial here from a legal perspective? A risk of appeal. Appeal of the construction permit can take place generally during first 30 days as of its issue, meaning in time when developer has not invested resources in the design yet. Appeal will generally stop further work on the design unless developer decides to continue this work at its own risks and cost. Please note that correct previous steps decrease a risk of successful appeal. However, any issue that was not properly addressed before may increase the risk that construction permit is cancelled. For example, in compliance with zoning requirements and not developing the detailed plan when it is needed leads to a higher risk that construction permit can be cancelled. This possibility of appeal is the reason why receipt of undisputed construction permit is one of the material milestones in the project. Therefore, please note the importance of this issue and think of possibilities to mitigate the risk of appeal, including by sufficient work with the previously identified stakeholders. When planning construction permits, one should also think of the amount of permits planned. Developer may intentionally decide to develop some part of the project separately from others where it's technically possible. Another important milestone is securing the grid. Renārs described the two stages. What to add here from a legal view? First, new regulations are coming. There are ongoing public discussions on new cabinet regulations on the issue of permits. There are some specific provisions that are in the focus of discussions and something that has not been approved yet. Introduction of hybrid permit, limitations to fully substitute the initially defined production facility during development stage. As soon as these regulations are adopted, we will provide a more detailed review on this. Second, issue of technical conditions is stopped as grid is currently overbooked and developers currently holding such conditions are very limited in time to install new power. Otherwise, these technical conditions are cancelled and developer loses the grid reservation, and it will not be able to get a new one because of the mentioned stop in issue of technical conditions as notified by the TCO. Therefore, please pay attention to compliance with the terms. See specifically what conditions should be met and whether they were duly performed. Next stage is wind farm design development and approval. It's full of challenges, of course, but from legal view, you have to keep in mind that you have to invite specialists that are duly licensed to work in Latvia. Design shall be approved by the parties being affected and specifically identified in the construction permit, and respective municipality where construction permit was issued should also be among the ones to coordinate with. It's one or several, depends on the project. A separate topic here is insurance that has to be considered, and there is mandatory insurance, of course, and one may decide on optional one. Returning to the grid, the first agreement that is being signed with the transmission system operator is a grid connection development agreement. It describes responsibilities and accountability of the TCO and developer. It specifies who will arrange the procurement procedure, who will initiate construction, what the payment terms are, as well as describes many other connection-related matters to be mutually resolved. The agreement defines specific timing for implementing the connection development, and incompliance with this timing may lead to losing the grid reservation, so be aware. Depending on the type of content mentioned there, is different division of risks and also awareness of the costs is different. Note that the contract to some extent is subject to negotiations. In grid-related tender and design approvals, it's important to note that developer is responsible for organizing and paying for both parts, not only developer's side of connection, but also the TCOs. Now, when we have reached the next material project milestone after completion of 12 first steps, it is ready to build stage. A moment important from financing or investors' perspective, when investors have reasonable guarantees that project seems feasible. It is non-appealed construction permit. It is signed contract with the TCO securing the grid and having sufficient timing to complete construction and connection to the grid, as well as agreements that secure the land for the full project. This is a time when developers' work is evaluated. Every issue that has not been properly addressed before will be highlighted as risk during project analysis. In order to be ready for this stage, please pay attention to bankability and feasibility issues from the very beginning of the project, as it will affect the interest of potential investors and price, if you plan to sell the project, of course. Usually in the scope of legal review, there are not only the construction right agreement provisions, but also the decisions on environmental impact assessment, the permits, the grid agreements, and other documents that will provide details on feasibility of the particular project and possible risks the investor may face in the coming development of operation. Next step is construction. Construction phase starts with entering into the construction agreement. Here again, from a legal perspective, there is a formality that construction company has to be duly permitted for such activities and operation in Latvia. Generally, construction agreement is not only about the general purpose and object to be constructed and its details, but usually it's some kind of compromise of setting borders of liability of the involved parties. From one perspective, a lot of specialists involved, and actually none of them is keen to take responsibility for the full project or anything that is beyond its personal scope. But all the involved parties are very much dependent on what others have to perform. Therefore, this liability, in any case, should be on shoulders of one of the participants. For instance, a cost overrun, the delays, startup and testing problems, insufficient design, in compliance with the design, hidden defects, insurance obligations, and many others. There are a lot of topics for further webinars and discussions that we will also organize. When there is a clarity on construction agreement, then one should move to the agreement on turbine supply, so-called TCA. Delays in the market may request to enter into agreement or at least some pre-agreement documents way before we have reached this stage. So it should be checked during planning phase as well as overall timeline. Renārs has highlighted main risks, which include also legal ones, but additionally here should be mentioned topics on convertibility of the WTG as equipment with the basement that turbine suppliers usually are not responsible for. So it's combining the construction side and turbine side. Also, I may add that transportation-related risks should be approached and duly planned. Physical construction. This phase may bring a lot of surprises and necessity to make amendments to the approved design and many other practical topics. In one of the next webinars, we will speak about the process and risks related to commissioning the grid and overall project, as well as agreements that are signed with the TCO. When construction is duly completed and technical parts of commissioning are also completed, one should perform the registrations mandatory from production. Renārs has mentioned some of them. Additionally, I would like to highlight that a company that has installed electricity production facilities which exceed 50 megawatts shall register as an entity of importance to national security. It practically means additional approval from state authorities in cases of further changes in the shareholder structure of such company or even in beneficiaries. The operational stage starts with the necessity to arrange operation and maintenance services. When agreeing on it, in addition to warranties of availability, one should think about interrelations with the turbine supply agreement. What are the requirements for the spare parts to be available? Also, liability limitations for the service providers is something common in the operation and maintenance agreements. Again, there are a lot of topics to be agreed on. The purpose of all this process we went through is to find the most profitable offtake. The PPA experience is growing. The PPAs that are starting to become more popular in the market. Therefore, this is also a topic to think of from the very beginning. Probably the PPA may become decisive for the area of placements of the wind farm, so please do not leave this topic unattended. To sum up, don't forget the legally important parts. Timing that may be limited in various documents, sequence of actions that depend from one another, and mandatory regulation that developers should comply with. Do not ignore the stakeholders' interests and save the environment. All the rest may be adjusted as per particular needs of the project, and the faster developer may highlight the risk, the easier it is to mitigate it. Thank you for your attention and feel free to ask follow-up questions. If they are not replied during this webinar, we will include replies in the next, more detailed and
Thank you, Viktorija. Yes, I hope you've had a good insight into how the wind farms are built in Latvia, or at least what the processes are in terms of the technical parts and the legal parts. So I'm sure there are still plenty of questions and areas that have not been covered today. So let's try and dig in the question part. I've got Viktorija and Renārs here. We see that questions are coming in, but we will start by addressing those questions that had been sent in before the webinar. So Viktorija, I'm giving you my kind of responsibility to you now. Do you see through the questions, see what you can answer yourself, and ask also the questions to Renārs? Yeah.
Thank you, Lasma. Special thanks to all the participants for your interest and for the detailed questions. Let us start this Q&A session with a financial question. How do you keep wind projects profitable on the long term for developers when large-scale installations leads to more and more simultaneous generation, which actually leads to a lower electricity price?
Yeah, well, this is a really good question in terms of market predictability and how this comes all along, not only from the perspective at the time when you are ready to proceed with your financial investment decision, but also long term, because eventually, well, this type of business is peculiar in a way that, first of all, electricity is a very perishable good. It's something that exists there and can be snapped out in an instance. Well, pricing on a commercial market and merchant market is on hourly level, and price fluctuations are huge depending whether there is overproduction or underproduction on the market. So eventually, the only point in time you would be able to have a full control of your financial security of your project for the future is finding the right offtake arrangement for and securing this long term already before the actual investment phase. So, well, in Latvian case, there are no auction systems. There is no state support currently active. Eventually, you are left either with finding some PPAs, which is also challenging, as also Viktorija mentioned. So think about this in advance. Merchant market, again, that's something that will not give you reasonable security over long term. So this, in my opinion, is one of the most challenging topics currently on the market, how to effectively secure financial streams long term, indeed, to make sure they are insulated from any long term market fluctuations.
Thank you, Renārs. Next question is a bit more financial in depth. How high proportionality is geotechnical part, access roads, foundations, any other special geotechnical works, capex-wise? How this part can fluctuate in case of different soil conditions, and how important is to plan land plots in relation to the geotechnical situation?
Excellent question. A lot of those questions where technology and technical issues are mixed with finance that really gives some food for thought. Latvia is specific in terms of geology in a way that we have very mixed geological conditions. So generally, how you'll find it, on the ground, areas which are, let's say, more useful from wind perspective, the ones which are closest to Baltic Sea, are typically also have, let's say, the weakest geology conditions. So you would have to dig down 20 plus meters in some cases to reach really strong, the bedrock underneath the soil, and by doing so, it's and as you are moving towards the eastern side of Latvia, situation would generally improve. But in numeric terms, I would say that you would typically expect something like the capex of foundation part to be range of 60 up to 100,000 euros per megawatt. Just a ballpark figure to get a feeling about. And this is definitely, I'd say the largest component in the BOP. Roads are not really that problematic cases, and of course it also depends on how you're able to use existing municipal road structure for your access and so forth. Internal medium voltage cabling is even smaller challenge in this respect, but then again, geological conditions are very diverse, and it could be really something where you're facing really issues of really deep piling, and in some cases it's just gravity foundations, which it's an easy matter to follow upon.
Thank you. Switching from finances to the grid questions, One of the participants is interested in the current overheated situation regarding grid connection. What do you anticipate will happen here in the future?
Well, I guess there is always some kind of discrepancy between what the industry would think of as an optimal solution to that and to what actually comes as a result of some changes to the market, alterations to the market made by the institutions, government institutions, regulatories, and so forth. Well, the aim, there was an attempt to reform the whole market of grid connections last year. Well, apparently, in a way, it has failed, and the situation is sort of, well, stuck in some kind of limbo now. The most reasonable way how to proceed further would be to review the approach, how actually grid capacity is considered on the TSO side, whether there is some potential impact from technology which is used for connection, but at the same time, what is also important that, well, in essence, the market itself should be perhaps looked upon as something that, well, the grid connection is something that should be, going in line with your project preparation phase. So the more you are advanced in your project, the closer you are to actual financial investment decision, the more secure you should be about the grid availability. So, but then again, it's just a let's say, reasonable speculation about this. Life is always much more challenging than that.
Energy market and balancing is of particular interest. How do you foresee this in 2030 with higher RES penetration?
Well, I then perhaps go back with a counter question asking, like, did we really expect the market to look like as it is looking now 7 years ago? Apparently, no, it's the case. Now, it's really challenging to predict what will happen in 2030. Of course, and in this case, it's not even the issue of what will happen in 7 years, but it will happen in 2 years when there will be let's say, the great disconnection of the grids and the integration of Baltic electricity grid into European grid. That would be, I guess, the first challenging and also at the same time perhaps rewarding time period for the industry to see and to take up the slack which has been currently covered by coexisting of our eastern neighbor and its electrical network system, and well, this will be the first. I don't know. Well, it could be a shock. It could be. There definitely will be some challenges, but then again, all challenges are always presenting some opportunities as well. So it will become, well, definitely balancing will become even more and more important. There are no ready-made formulas for this, as a lot of technologies are evolving. Well, we are talking about hydrogen, we are talking about using electrolyzers, we are talking about some sort of additional potential to use and take off the grid any balancing excesses and so forth. But at the same time, it's challenges mixed with opportunities, and that's something that we'll have to live with for the upcoming years.
Thank you. Moving from future issues to more your experience in the past, what are the most often encountered obstacles in wind turbine installation?
I am presuming that the question really is about wind turbine installation. So in case if it's more about development, I guess, well, the whole webinar was really about that topic. But if we really focus on the installation part, I guess, well, there are three major components in this. Now, if we are talking about turbine deliveries, there is really limited number of ports that are able to handle large cargoes, like blades and tower sections, and well, in case of Latvia, well, it's just so far it has been Ventspils and to some degree Liepāja ports that were able to do so. In case of developing projects somewhere closer to the border of Estonia and Lithuania, of course, one can always consider ports in these neighboring countries as well. But then again, it's really limited number of options for delivery of these components. And then, well, also route surveys, unfortunately, well, most of the routes are not, well, they are suitable to some degree, but there are a lot of, let's say, edges which are quite difficult to overcome, especially with turbine components, which are, well, more than 80 meters in length. So that's something that turbine manufacturers, but also developers as well, if there are any quite critical issues which should be considered in advance. And finally, well, the installation itself, Latvian wind profile across seasons is quite, let's say, clear. Well, end of September, well, winds pick up, and well, it stays like that relatively until beginning of April. So if you are now facing a situation when you are thinking of potentially, well, installing turbines during winter season, it might be very costly in terms of weather delays, teams simply sitting on the site due to strong wind situations during installation process and so forth. So please always account for really a lot of contingency costs in those cases when you are planning your installation works to be done outside, let's say, well, warm summer season.
Thank you. Would you recommend new wind farms to be registered as object of national interests?
Well, object of national interest is something that has not yet been implemented. It is there in regulations, but it has not been ever called out and brought to actual implementation. And well, the purpose of this initially was, and it still is, to counteract well, some cases, some forces on the ground which they are going beyond any reasonable limit. So if you are there with your wind farm and you have completed environmental impact assessment, which shows that, well, from the point of view of impact on environment, also on community, well, your project is feasible, you may, well, occasionally encounter strong local resistance, and since part of the decision-making lies with municipalities, they might be prone to, well, actually stalling your project, well, in the interest of some groups which are present there. So, in a way, this status of national project of national interest, an opportunity to actually to pass these issues and actually to get to the implementation phase. But then again, it should be used sparingly. It's not really something that you would swing around as an axe in each development case you are facing.
And probably the final question of more general nature: why the industry of wind power, in your opinion, is lagging behind many European peers in Latvia, though having such an abundance of resources?
Yeah, well, excellent question. So if we think about physical resources, about nature itself, yeah, well, absolutely, that's true. Relatively good winds, so dense, well, let's say spread out population centers and so forth. But then again, it also comes with actually being able to gain some kind of long-term, well, financing security. And since the market itself has been very fragmented, the potential for PPAs has not been there to the extent it has been in Scandinavian countries or in Central Europe. And they, well, let's say the development of privately organized market connections has been lagging behind simply due to the, well, the size, the limited size of the market itself. And at the same time, well, let's not discuss the past support programs which were affected by the government. Let's just look at what it's now. Well, it's the same issue. So while the industry itself is ready to proceed and jump ahead and so forth, it is facing the issue, and of course it's a very justified scrutiny from let's say bankers on long-term security of future income itself, and everybody is really worried about not about the, let's say, your base case scenario or it's the best case scenario. They're worried about the worst case scenario. So, and in this case, merchant market itself is not able to provide long-term solutions. So, a reasonable way for the policymakers to look at the, in this current situation, at the market would be to perhaps consider some elements which eliminate risk from the producer side, and at the same time, it would also guarantee some reasonable also security for energy consumers. So the exact method of implementation, be it CFDs or any other alternatives, is let's say still reasonably up for discussion. But well, there should be some kind of implied, let's say, risk aversion guarantees, which should be built in the market from the regulators to avoid worst case scenarios, and at the same time guarantee a much more stable and a lower limit.
Thank you, Renārs. And the very final question that just has appeared: are you aware of any PPAs concluded in Latvia regarding wind farms?
Well, there are 3 wind farms out there. I have been involved with 2 of them. Now, well, there are, let's say, some PPAs out there. They are not long-term, but as a general principle, as I said, it has been really challenging to match the, well, let's say, the long profiles which are needed for energy producers in terms of securing the output and the offtake. Well, let's say the perspective of potential consumers, large customers, and well, bringing and aligning, let's say, perceptions of, let's say, 10 years in terms of energy. It's a normal well, investment horizon or deal horizon is something that should be more and more embraced also on the consumer side. So, well, it is quite an issue regarding PPAs, but well, hopefully this will change in the future in case if there are also some additional mechanisms, support mechanisms. Well, I'm saying support mechanisms, but what I really mean is risk elimination mechanisms for parties built in by regulators.
Thank you, Renārs. It unfortunately, time-wise, seems that we will not manage any additional questions. However, we see the interests of the participants. We are grateful for that. And we have noted all of these questions and will address them in any of the coming webinars. So please follow up the notifications about next topics that will follow shortly, and share with us your thoughts on topics that you are interested in specialists that you would like to hear, as well as let us know your specific questions that you would like us to address in the content of the following webinars. Thank you once more for your interest and participation, and have a great day.
Thank you.